Hello, it's Jimmy here at O'Reilly's Mobile Mechanics, and I'm gonna show you today how we diagnose DPF issues for blockages or other issues that may be causing DPF warning lights to come up. So I've got a couple of cars here that we can do some tests on, BMW 5 Series and a Mercedes C-Class. So a couple of the tools that we'd use is a diagnostic system. This one is in Autel MK906 BT model, and I've got an Autool digital manometer here. This can test the pressure, and I've got a Medivac pressure gauge or pressure tester. So the first thing you'd normally do with any car is obviously switch the ignition on and get your diagnostic system up and running. Now we'd go into live data and see what the readings are on the DPF system itself. So we're going to search for the particle filter. Let's move some of this down. So we need to find the particle filter soot mass and the differential pressure sensor, and we'll move those up to the top. That's how it works on this particular machine here. So you can see here we've got a reading of 2.97 and the soot mass is 10.9 grams. So when you start the car up, what you want to see is the particle filter pressure sensor should be under 15 HPA or millibars MBAR, and on a full acceleration you're looking at less than 80. Anything above those is going to be needing a clean. And those are maximum measures really. You want to see it below those. Usually when I do a clean on idle, I'd have this sitting around about 5 or 6 HPA, and on a full acceleration around about 40 to 50. So we'll start the car up now and see what readings we've got on this car. So we've got 14.97. That's dropping a bit. So it's fluctuating around a bit. Now it is fluctuating a small bit, but not massively. So if you see that jumping around from 7 to 25, back to 6, back to 30, that would indicate that there is something wrong, maybe like a split in the tube or a slight blockage. Now if we hold the accelerator up to about 2,500 RPM, try and hold that steady there if we can. We've got about 46, so we'll give it a full acceleration now. .84, so I'd say that that's not blocked. Once that idles down, that'll settle back. So what I've done here for a test is I've pulled off the DPF pressure pipe. Now if we have a look on the live data, it says there we've got 29 HPA on the reading, which is a fair bit different to what it just said. So let's accelerate the car up. And you can see it's actually lowering because one side of the DPF hose is disconnected. This would give you similar readings if you had a split in one of the hoses or a blockage in one of the DPF hoses. The DPF hose that you'd be looking for would look something like this, and it would go into a sensor, little plastic sensor, something that looks similar to this. Little light on there. So you'd have like a differential pressure sensor that looks something like this with hoses going in, usually two hoses. What I'd say we've learned from that diagnostic result there on the first one was 15 millibars as it first started. It eased down to about 6, and we had a maximum of 80. So you'd say that that DPF is really okay. So if you've got a DPF warning on there and the differential pressure is lower than that, then you haven't got a blocked DPF. The issue is somewhere else, and it can give you DPF blockage warnings or risk of particle filter blockage warnings, just because it's giving you a warning that there is something wrong, and it's going to cause DPF issues if you don't get it sorted. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is connect up this MIDI-vac pressure gauge to the DPF sensor, pressure sensor, and I'm going to replicate a blocked DPF. I can do that is by squeezing this and putting pressure into the sensor, which will then simulate a blocked DPF readings on the diagnostic system. So I have the vehicle running now, and I'm going to accelerate it while I'm putting pressure on the MIDI-vac, and we can read the DPF pressure sensor. So what you would get is something like that. So as you accelerate the car up, you then get high readings like that. And what those high readings are going to do, if you take notice, is the particle filter soot mass is now going to increase rapidly because it thinks that the DPF is getting highly blocked. The measured soot mass is going to increase rapidly. You can see now we've got the DPF connected back up properly, but what happens now is that soot mass is now at a very high state. So what would happen is you'd have to accelerate the car or take it for a drive to see if the soot mass would lower. Now on some cars, once that soot mass gets to a certain height, it won't come back down automatically, not without resetting the DPF itself. So let's see if that does decide to go down. So you can see there that that's decreasing. Data readings like this, on some cars you will get it to lower, and on some cars is once the soot mass has calculated up to a certain level, it just locks out, and the only way to get that back down and delete the DPF error is to tell the car it's had a new one. Now you should only tell the car it's had a new DPF if your DPF pressure is within a normal limit. So if you've got 500 millibars of pressure on your DPF and then you reset the DPF and tell her it's had a new one, it will only last a couple of minutes. You will be able to delete the code, but within a few minutes the sensor is going to pick back up the pressure and it's going to realize, hang on a minute, it's still blocked. It will give you some time because the DPF itself will try and regenerate the soot back out and bring the pressure back down. But after a few minutes, when it realizes it can't, you'll then get the DPF warning come back up again. What you can do to reset those soot levels back to zero. So if you're trying to do a DPF regeneration, for instance, and it won't let you do the DPF regeneration because the soot levels are too high and it thinks it's going to be, impossible to regenerate the car. So you'd have to go back on this particular machine here. I'd go to, so it depends on the car, but it's usually in hot functions, and then we'd have to go in and see if we can find a DPF and register a replacement. So it'd have different wording for different models of cars. On a BMW this one is, so it's saying register the replacement of a DPF. So if I do this, okay, reset the values, this one, F1. Do you really want to register a replacement DPF? Yes. So that's now been reset. So if we now go back to the diagnostics, go into the engine and go back to the live data. Just wait for that to finish. We'll go back in there, go to the live data again, find the DPF pressure and the soot mass, and it should now be on 0. So let's find the particle filter. Particle filter, soot mass and the differential pressure. Back to the top. You can see there now the soot mass is on 0. So that's what telling it it's at our new DPF. That's all that it does. Is it just resets that the calculated soot mass back to 0. So you might have seen on a few of our videos before, we've had Mercedes and a Range Rover recently where even when the car is switched off like this, we had a 100 HPA reading on the DPF, and when you start it up it didn't really move. It went to like 105 or 110, and what that was a faulty particle filter differential pressure sensor. And once that sensor goes out, it will then send the particle filter soot mass. Those grams will go crazy because it will think that there's a massive blockage in the DPF, and it will trigger off the soot mass and then tell you that your DPF is unable to do a regeneration. It's gone beyond the point of regeneration because the soot grams are too high, when actually they're not. It's just because that the DPF sensor was out. Now, I recently had a person with a Range Rover come to me, and the soot mass was really high, and he was told by the Range Rover garage that because the soot mass was so high, he can't have the DPF regenerated or cleaned. He needs to have the whole lot replaced, along with the turbo, and I think he was quoted something like 6,000 to 8,000 for that. Now, I came to the conclusion that it was just a sensor that was out, so we replaced the sensor. The pressure readings went back to normal, and once the readings are in the normal area there, you can then just reset that soot mass back, and the vehicle is absolutely fine. So the misconception with this particle soot mass grams can lead people into thinking that they need a new DPF, because even on Range Rovers or Mercedes it will give you a message up here that your DPF is blocked and it needs replacing. So that is a good point there, just to make that not to take notice of the actual soot grams unless the actual differential pressure is high. We'll go to where you might need to use one of these digital manometers. If you've got some erratic readings on the live data here for the DPF, where you're looking at this and it's suspiciously high or it's suspiciously low. So if you've got the car accelerating and you've got, say for instance, 1 or 2 millibars, and it's not increasing when you accelerate the car, now you need to find out, one, is there a problem with some of the DPF? You've got metal pipes that come on the DPF and then they connect to a rubber hose similar like to what you'd have here. So you could have a blockage in the metal pipe of the soot, or you could have a split hose that leads to the pressure sensor, which would be something like this but a little bit more substantial. And the other scenario is that is the DPF pressure sensor itself just giving you the wrong readings, and a good way to measure that is by looking at one of these digital manometers. So if you've got 5 millibars on your live data on your computer, it should give you exactly the same reading on one of these, and if it doesn't, then you've got a split hose or a faulty DPF pressure sensor. If we look at the live data now, we have around about 19 to 21 on the reading. So if we connect our manometer, we should get the same reading. So let's go outside and do that. So with that connected up there, we got 5 millibars. We can change the units on here. Millibars is 5.56. And back inside the car there on that same sensor there we have 15.97, which is a little bit different to what the manometer is reading. So that would suggest that the sensor there is given an incorrect reading. Test that you can do, recently we've seen a few Citroens with a problem where the sensor is not getting any sort of readings from the pressure at all, and again that can point to a faulty sensor. But we put some pressure on the hoses and we found that the hoses were blocked. So a good way to test that is again with the midi vac, and we get the hose from the midi vac and connect it to that sensor tube or sensor hose. Connect that up there, and then what we want to do is put pressure into it. Let's just turn that around so we can see it properly. We're on the pressure setting there, and you want to squeeze the trigger by putting pressure into it, and that's how it should be there. It shouldn't move. So if you see that moving or it goes up, in extreme cases I had a Citroen recently where it would go all the way up to 15 or 20 psi. But even if that needle jumps as you're squeezing it, then you know you've got a partially blocked hose. But in this case we're okay. So the hose is not blocked, we know. And then the next case what we'd want to do is, we know it's not blocked, but it doesn't mean that there's not a split or a leak in the hose. So another way to test that is with a smoke machine here. This is an O'Toole smoke leak detector. How this would work is we just connect up the cables there to the car. We've got a live and negative cable connected to the car, one on the chassis mount and one on the live terminal there. We'd switch it on and we wait for some smoke to come out of the hose here. Sometimes this smoke is not very visible on the camera. But we're starting to get some smoke out now. So what we do is put this smoke pipe onto the hose there again. Just connect that up. And then we'll wait a few minutes and just make sure that we're not seeing any smoke leaking anywhere from the hoses. So it's now been a minute there and we can see there's no smoke leaking from the hoses, which is a good sign. Now if you got a leak from or a split in any of these hoses, you'd see smoke coming out. And we are actually in the middle of doing a Mercedes at the minute. That's got some split hose pipes. It's got the 1.5 DCI engine from the Renaults, which has that same common issue. So another sign that your DPF pressure sensor is out there is because if you look at those readings, now we turn the ignition off completely. And the reading is still there. So we shouldn't have 11 HPA or 11 millibars of pressure while the engine is switched off. So that would indicate that there is something wrong with that sensor there. So another thing I'd like to add there on the video is I do see a lot of cars that when you try to do a regeneration, or people call me because they've tried to have it regenerated at a garage and the car is refusing to regenerate. So you'd have some common issues for that, which would be one is you've got a boost leak somewhere, two is your glow plugs aren't working, or you've got another sort of related fault like that in the engine that's preventing regenerations. And the other one is that the soot mass is too high to trigger off regeneration. So you can trigger a regeneration by resetting all of those values and adaptions and then resetting the codes on the system, which will allow you to do a DPF regen. Okay, so that's about all it there. I hope I've covered enough on the video there for all the questions that you needed regarding DPFs. So that's about it, and we'll see you on one of the next videos.